I observed your class yesterday during fourth period when you were doing your lesson on inequalities, and your class you usually have about 25 students, and 5 were out yesterday,
Right.
Specifically one that I was going to be tracking. And so the lesson was about inequalities, and you were really working to let the students discover what inequalities were. And so when I came in, I observed you working through a Desmos on the board, and the students had that on their screen, and they were working through the different kind of slides as you progressed them through it. And so I wanted to just ask what your thoughts were on how you thought the lesson went, as far as the learning target we spoke about. Did you feel like they met that target? And did you get out of the lesson what you needed to in order to provide your formative assessment to move forward?
Sure. I think the lesson went really well. The students were able to discover the difference in, say, greater than and greater than or equal to. So they were able to talk about open versus closed circles without me having to explain it. They were able to decide why we shade. They were able to talk about, the infinite possible number of solutions. So many dots, it just winds up looking like a solid line. So I think it went really well. And then based on student answers that they typed in, I just quickly jotted down some notes about, hey, this person probably needs small group on, shading. This person probably needs small group on open versus closed circles. And I was able to do that today in my class during building your time before our next lesson.
And I really like the way that program allowed you to see on the screen what the students were typing, and you would, before you moved on to the next slide, point out some good ones, and then you also took the time to point out some ones that could have made improvements on and ask those students to elaborate on.
Right. I tried to scaffold them up as well so students could kind of see, oh, yeah, oh, wow, oh, yeah, and so I just tried to make the progression up into, a basic understanding all the way up to actual math vocabulary.
And there were some really higher level, deep answers using that math vocabulary, and I really like the way that you praised your students for their answers.
Thank you, Sarah.
That really does build good community and class culture. So those are the things that went well, and I would agree with everything you said. What, if anything, would you maybe change? And I know as a teacher, a lot of times when we do lessons, they do change throughout the day. So is there anything that you did change throughout the day, or maybe looking back, if you did this lesson again next year, that you would change?
There was a component of the lesson where students had that card sorting activity, and they had to put a number sentence with an actual sentence and then with its graph. And so students got a little bit discouraged during that time. And looking back, so I think I might have said, hey, use one of your partner's computers, and you and your partner work together on this. So I think maybe I would have allowed them to collaborate more during the lesson. And they did come to collaborate towards the end of that card sorting activity when I let students walk around and help other students. But I think maybe I should have started with collaboration. And then when I went to the second card sorting activity where they were making the 6 pairs of 2, I think that's when I probably should have done independent after they had practiced with another student.
And I like the way that you talked about you let your students walk around. So you kind of differentiated there. You saw you could see on the screen the students that had gotten it, and you gave them the opportunity to be an expert and to help those students that were struggling. And I thought that was an excellent use of your quick formative assessment and giving those students a little bit more ownership in the classroom.
Reimagine exceptional with the 2024 Buick Envision. Buick, exceptional by design.
Get 0.9% APR, plus no monthly payments for 90 days on this 2024 Buick Envision.
So I thought that was a great job there. So I tracked some behaviors that we had discussed about a specific student. There were 5 students, and then one of them was out. And so I tracked those behaviors in 5-minute increments, and we were looking at whether the student was on task or off task. You talked about blurting out was something that you had trouble with. I noted there was a student who was out of the room for 2 of the increment times. And we also talked about how students were kind of just looking around and daydreaming and even having their head down. So I provided you the data earlier, is there anything that you noticed about the data that kind of stood out for you, maybe patterns or any particular observations that you had?
Well, a couple of things that I noticed on the data. One of the students, the student who is not here, that you are supposed to be tracking, he sits in a location in the room that stirs up one of the other ones here that you were tracking. So I feel like we saw better behavior out of Drew than you normally would see when his friend was in close proximity to him. I also noticed that there were one student in particular who required a lot of teacher assistance, which that's pretty normal for him. And if you're looking at the times by blocks, we kind of struggle when we're first coming in from lunch. It's like they're still kind of hyped up from lunch. And then again at about 11:55, we had some off-task behavior. And judging by the time, I think that was probably towards the end of that card sorting activity. So I think we might have either had some discouragement or maybe some early finishers there that kind of encouraged that specific time block of being off task. And then again, at the very, very end of class at 12:05, these students in particular have a hard time following our exiting procedures. And that is something that we talk about often.
And I agree. I went through and I did the percentages, and just like you said, 67% of the time towards the beginning of class, we had on-task behavior. Behaviors that I noted that happened during the beginning of the class were head down was one of them, and then just kind of looking around, having trouble getting onto the lesson and getting started. In the middle of the lesson, I tracked 100% several times, several increments. And then, like you said, towards the end of class, and it was during that card sorting activity where it was probably due to discouragement or just having that a little bit more of it, the independent time where they were supposed to be doing their task and you weren't, okay, you got to do this slide. And then you did that prompt where you were like, okay, in 5. So they had a little bit more time on their own to get off task and to get distracted. And then wrapping up at the end of the day when it's time to, they knew it was class was winding down, it was time to get over. That's where they were off task the most. So I think if we're looking at the beginning and the end of class periods, and I think that's pretty common in a lot of classes. Yeah, getting started and then knowing it's over. Especially these middle school students, they like to pack up early. Yes, they do, which is one of my pet peeves. But I'm not going to go into that. So, are there any things that you can think of that maybe knowing that those are struggles at the beginning of the class and at the end of the class, and I just want to say. Everything I observed, you were doing everything right. I mean, your classroom management, I mean, it was evident that you have gone through those procedures, and the students, they knew what to do. I mean, if they're misbehaving, it's a choice because you can tell by the rest of the students, it was evident you have procedures in place. You were around the room the whole time, so that proximity, they could feel you and they knew you were going to be near them to keep them on task. The positive praise that you were giving students, I mean, I could tell students were feeling good about what you were saying. And they weren't afraid to be called on because you could, I think that they could feel that you were going to help them along the way if they were struggling. And that's something big, especially in math classes. Students, they don't like to answer questions because they're afraid of getting them wrong. Right. You differentiated. You modeled the way you were teaching. I could see when the students were teaching that they were trying to model themselves after you. And so it's hard for me to give some suggestions because I mean you were doing all the right things. Are there anything that knowing the beginning and the end is the biggest struggle? Are there any things that you can think of that you could do differently?
Imagine what Da Vinci could have built if he had the smart buying tools on Amazon Business.
Sorry I took the last Halo.
I'm sorry I ratted you out to the IRS.
You did what?
Hands off my halos.
Well, I'm thinking it's these 5 students in particular who seem to be causing the issue, and maybe, because they are not on task at the beginning of class, their neighbors may not be on task either. And I do prefer to.
All right, sorry about that. I guess it caps us out at 10 minutes, but we were talking about ideas that you had that you could maybe implement at the beginning and the end of class.
So these 5 students in particular are the ones who are off task at the very beginning and the very end. And because they are off task, they are kind of disrupting their neighbors, which is causing their neighbors to be off task. So 2 of these students, one whom you did not see, they sit together. And I think that they probably need to be separated. I wish you could have observed how they interact with one another. Another student has an IEP, and then one of the 5 students has a behavior plan. So I think that if I could give Justin and Quay a specific task, like, hey, if you guys do well walking back from lunch today, I'm going to let you start my computer when everyone else is coming in the room. So giving them some sort of like, oh, I get to do this, something to make them feel special, something to make them work towards something. I think that would be good for those 2 gentlemen. And then one of those gentlemen in particular, Quay, he seems to have an influence on his friend Kelsey. I think if Quay had more positive behaviors, that she would probably also follow that as well. So those are my thoughts.
I think that's a great idea. And a lot of times we as teachers kind of feel, I don't know, like, for instance, with Quay, he might not be the type of student that you would want to go turn on your computer. But when we give those type of students that type of responsibility and opportunity, a lot of times they'll surprise us. And so I think that would be a great idea for him, especially because he would feel like he's getting to do a job, and if that was his procedure he knew he was supposed to come in and do every day, I think that would be an excellent job.
Yeah, the last time we worked on a PBL, Quay was our noise monitor, and he did an excellent job. I mean, I didn't have to control the volume of the class at all because he took so much ownership in it. So I need to find something that every day he can find the ownership in.
I think that's good, and especially with those students that tend to be leaders but can tend to influence your class in a negative way and lead them negatively. If we could find ways to give positive spin on that, then that could change, the whole class. So I think that's a wonderful idea. So if there's anything I can ever do in the future for you, any additional ways I can provide support, I enjoyed coming in. So if you would like for me to come back when Talon's here, and to kind of see how that makeup changes the class, because one student can change the class, unfortunately. That I can do that for you, but I just want to thank you for letting me know.
Anytime. Thanks, Tessa.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too.